All right, my fine friends, it's Erin Nelson, or Hanky Pasenki, here back with you, working on this Fire Wyvern Egg. Um, Almost done with this, really into the last final, like, fancy steps. Waxed on scales, etched back scales, put some dye color into the etch lines, took off the wax, realized it was a little bit too black. So now I've started putting some color with India inks onto the scales. So what I did do before I got started was I did put on a layer of clear coat. So it's just a spray UV resist clear coat. I think it's a satin or gloss. Just clear. It's just clear. So the advantage of this particular one that makes it very useful for this particular purpose is that it dries very quickly. It dries to the touch in about 20 minutes, and you can handle it after 2 hours, which means that you can go back in and start working on it again pretty quickly. I like to put on one layer of clear coat before I do anything with inks. With India inks, because then if anything goes wrong, I can literally just scrape it off or remove it and start over again and not lose what's underneath. So it was mostly black. None of the original dyes on the scales were showing up. So this has a couple of layers in there. This has a whole bunch of layers. So what I'm working with, or I have a variety of acrylic or calligraphy inks. So some people call them India inks, calligraphy inks, India inks because, you know, if you get your old school, nice little Eggins, got some Winsor Newton nut brown. This one is a birdwing copper. This is my personal favorite gold. I've got a lot of golds, and they're all kind of different. So this is a really a true gold that looks like gilding. It is challenging to work with. You have to keep it very well stirred up, constantly stir. It settles out really quickly, but it's gorgeous, and it gives a nice gilded effect. What I'm also using on this, I started out with this autumn gold, which usually I really like for bright highlights. It was not quite right for this. It was a little bit too, it wasn't right. And then I've also been working with this copper plate gold, which is a nice deep gold. It settles out. It's this one. So this one up here is that. This one here is this, and you can see how it settles really quickly. But if you stir it back up, that one might be a little too dry. Oh, that one's gotten real dark, and it's really sedimented out. Oh, there we go. Starting to come back. It's in there. It really is. It's gold, but it's a nice dark gold, which is useful for this. This is also that. So you can see the lighter part that's dried, and then the darker part where it's kind of settled out. And then I'm also, this is the birdwing copper, which is very coppery, but it's been really nice for blending together. And then this is a mix. So it's a mix of the birdwing copper, it's a mix of a little bit of the copper plate gold, a little bit of this super intense crimson, a little bit of brown, just a whole bunch of things all kind of mushed up in there together. So the golds give it body so that it shows up against the black, and then the red and the crimsons give it this reddish tone. So these already have this blended dark red mix kind of going on. I've already put in a layer of those, and then I'm coming back in with the lighter golds and coppers just to give it a little bit of like striation and texture. and try to make it a little bit more rocky, a little more dimensional, a little more fiery. And here I've got some of the Winsor Newton gold that I'm using pretty sparingly, but you know, get it in there every once in a while. It gives a really nice pop. Now, if you're wondering how I actually work with the inks, it's very simple. It's a brush. And I just kind of like stipple it on or roll it on or do whatever. Mix that back up and get that where we want to go. Haven't done up here yet. And then I'll kind of give it some lines. That's a little intense, but I can just blot it. And they're water-based, much like the dyes that we usually use when we're working on eggs. So that means they clean up crazy easy. You can, before they set up, you can just rinse them off if you don't like what you've done, which can be very handy sometimes. Mix in a little bit of copper there. And then when the time comes, when I'm happy with all of this, with the color and with things going on with it, then I will spray a finish coat of varnish in over it. Now you can also use sponges for this. I personally kind of prefer getting in there with a brush. Then I don't get as much overspray or, you know, stuff getting smooshed down into the cut lines. I can do a little bit easier blending, and I don't have any teeny tiny natural sea sponges, so I would have to use cosmetic sponges, and I haven't had good experiences with trying to use cosmetic sponges with putting inks onto eggs, which I do a lot with dragon eggs, because it allows me to get brighter colors onto a very dark background. Whereas if you're working with dyes alone, and you have a very dark background to start with, or a very dark eggshell to start with, you can kind of only go darker. You can't really go lighter. A little bit of water again. Make sure that your drinking water is in a different kind of container than your rinse water. All of these need to be shaken up really, really well. And don't do what I did here and, you know, put in too much, because then it'll dry out and then you're just wasting it. So smaller is better, smaller amounts is better. You can just keep adding more if you're using a straight up color. If you're blending it or mixing it, then obviously you're blending it or mixing it, and you try to mix up as much as you need or slightly more, so that you don't end up with totally different variations on your color. I've already gotten gold on there. Yeah, I finished up most of this. Trick when you're working in the round, obviously, since this goes all the way around, you want to work on it in bits and pieces. Like, you know, work on like half of it or a quarter or a third, and then walk away for a little while and let it dry before you keep rotating, because it does take a minute to dry. I mean, more than a minute. You kind of don't want to smear all of your work. Just a little Q-tip just to rub away a little bit of ink that I schmutzed into the cut line there where I didn't want it. Now if these were smaller scales, I might be just highlighting top areas, like where highlights would fall, and then leave shadows. But I'm sort of trying to add texture to it, instead of working exclusively with a texture that's already there. I use just different pieces of paper as a background here so I can do whatever I want to it. blot my brushes right on my working space. Works great. I'm trying to refer to my reference art in the background occasionally, just to try to keep myself on track and from getting too regular. I used to work with a gal painting scenery who would constantly curse me on being too orderly and too geometric. She was like, you can't do organic, you can't do random. And I was like, yeah, why would I do organic and random when you can do orderly and perfect and geometric and gorgeous? It's like, yeah, but that's not how nature works. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not nature, but I do occasionally try to do things that are slightly more organic than nature. And that red I used has so much crimson in it that it's pretty, there's some pretty intense red in here. Just slap some gold on top of it. Now I'm already through this. Time for more. I don't need much of the bright golds here in on the bottom third of the egg, because that should just be darker. But I want a little bit, just a little bit. A little of the copper just to bring out some zhuzh. Now, one time I do love working sponges is if it's on like a wall. If you're using a big old surface, and then a natural sea sponge is great for adding in texture. But on a tiny little egg, it doesn't give you quite as much precision as a brush does. And the brush really lets you put it right where you want it. So if you catch a little something where you're like, ooh, look, there's a little ledge there, I really kind of want to pick that up, give it a little highlight. I can pick that up and give it a little highlight. Actually, I think it's time for some fancy gold. Again, this stuff is so fun. So this is the Winsor Newton Gold, which is one of my favorites, as I think I've said. Let's see if you can see how, like, it's like moving. It's like an acid trip. It just, as the gold sort of separates out from the water, it really, it happens fast. It's very shimmery. But for those, I'll just go straight out of the cap, or dip a toothpick in it and then take it off the toothpick. Right, where was I working? Here. Just give it a little bit right there. I think I've got this now. No? Okay, just a little bit there too. Well, okay. So we've got a little bit more going on. Give it a little more lava rock kind of feel to it. Got some nice variation of color in there. And ooh, let's try lighting it up again, because I'm really enjoying how well this one lights up. Okay. Assuming I can remember where I put my flashlight. I'll come to that, back to that. I don't know where the flashlight is, so we're not going to do that right now. Okay. So then when I'm happy with this, I've got 2 different kinds of spray varnish that I'll use as a final coat for different projects. I'm not going to use both of them at the same time. That's not really a great idea to mix varnishes. For this, I'll actually be using this, the golden archival varnish, and a lot of times I use the one-shot. If you can find it. It's remarkably difficult to find in a spray right now, and this one's almost empty, but it's the same speed dry UV acrylic clear that you can get in quarts or pints or even gallons if you really are using a lot. It's going to take you a long time to get through a gallon of varnish, but if you really like having gallons around, I usually buy it in pints.